Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this invited talk organized by the Center for Chinese Law. My name is Ying Xia, and I'm an assistant professor at HKU Law School. So today we're very delighted to have Professor Andrew Huang, who has a very interesting and resume and abundant experience in both research and practice. So Professor Huang has his a PhD degree from HKU Law School from this faculty, and he also has an SJD from Yale Law School. And since then, he's taught at various institutions in different places and in and outside of China. And he's also an entrepreneur, as you can see from the slide. And the topic for today is entitled "A Great Shift: The Birth of Regulatory Party State in China." And the format for this talk is that Professor Huang will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for questions and answers. So without further ado, Professor Huang, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, first I want to say thank you very much to Professor Xia and to moderator the talk, and also thank you for Hong Kong U, because I haven't been able to go back since pandemics. I've lived in Hong Kong since 2008 to 2013, 5 years before I moved to Yale. So my experience in Hong Kong U, I think should be a little different, but today I still feel Hong Kong U is still quite similar when I was young, much younger than now. So this topic actually is based on part of my PhD thesis at Yale. But I would say it's a part of result of struggle, intellectual struggle to interpret, to legitimate my research of state capitalism. The tricky thing is when I first go to Yale at 2013, China-US relation is quite different from now. So at the time, Obama administration is still talking about concept of chimerica. So at that time, state capitalism is general will as a myth of Chinese success, that American scholars are so curious that what American government can learn from China and Chinese government to uphold the fast growth and also maintain the social stability. So the talk is quite different here. So when I read the topic with my professor at Yale, Susan Rose Ackerman, she thinks it's not that interesting because many people have argued that state capitalism, including Aaron Breimer, that state capitalism is important trend that sooner or later will compete with Western democracy and will be the biggest threat to the liberal capitalism in the future. But right now we have observed something quite different, that China and US relation going worse and worse, and China's economic growth is slowing down. So that is when I finally finished my PhD thesis after 80 years. It reminded me it's a good time to rethink the topic. And I think the result is basically, even though it's based on my PhD thesis, but I draw a very different conclusion. And my conclusion here, I tell you now, that is state capitalism concept should not be used. That we should use a regulatory party state to replace this. And I will explain the reason. Okay, so the central question around all people starting China state capitalism encounter some problems in the past 10 years. I think there are 3 questions that they have to answer. First is how China's economy, political economy, has been transformed. Of course, we have observed such a transformation, that Chinese leadership are apparently considering different things and doing differently, and they apparently issue very different policies. But what is the change? What is the fundamental change that drives the institutional change? Secondly, if the change indeed happen, what is the dynamics? Is it personal? Is it from political logic? Is it from China-US relation, or is it from something else? Now, thirdly, if we are in a different system, what should we do? And what shall we use a very different framework to interpret this current situation? So I just like to go a little earlier when the now Chinese leader first got the power in 2013. And he mentioned a very important concept called common prosperity, 共同富裕. This slogan actually dates back to 1953. and of course, caused a lot of panic of entrepreneurs and foreign investment. But I want to remind that that slogan were actually supported by a majority of Chinese public as a basis to demand to curb excessive capitalization and demand for the retributive justice. So when people talk about the topic, state capitalism, usually it's about a negative thing. But when they talk about socialism and common prosperity in 2013, people are less worried about them. Rather, they compare it with European-style welfare socialism as an alternative to the state capitalism. And I also want to mention there's another tricky thing. A lot of criticism to the current system is the state has become very big and the private party is shrinking. But just let's go back, think about the conception of state advance and private retreat, 国进民退, actually happened in Hu Jintao administration. It's not under the new leadership. So if we go back to the historical backdrop, we have to think about what is happening there. And relating to this, this change has been very fundamental, not only domestically, but also internationally. Because state capitalism allegation is attractive to many developing countries because China realized the longest and fastest growth in recent years in a global scope. But when China's system slowed down, it should be a negative result of policy change or should be a consequence of prior state capitalism. So a lot of countries they used to want to learn from China, but now need to reinterpret China's experience. So that is my intuition to make this piece. That is because after reading a lot of literature about state capitalism, I realized that state capitalism itself has severe disadvantage that should not be used a persuasive model, and rather we need something as an alternative to reinterpret the new paradigm under China's political economy. So as a very quick cap, there are generally 4 series of state capitalism in China, and the most influential one we call the national championship. National championship model basically argues that the Chinese government aims to boost the Chinese economy by support state-owned enterprises. So state champion or national champion means there's big monopolized companies on energy, telecom, the banking, and government-funded companies by subsidies and also regulate the companies favorably. Of course, there's some criticism to this national championship model by either arguing their high cost or less efficiency or corruption, but also people recognize that it could be very effective in developing fast growth. And another model, mainly argued by MIT professor Huang Yasheng, I call it predatory model, is much more negative than national championship model. Basically, they say the growth of state-owned enterprises is not based on the development, but based on to grab the private sectors, in particular the smaller village-backed sectors, 乡镇企业. So in that case, they think that sooner or later will pose very high political cost to Chinese economic model and growth model. And the third one, I would say is relatively new. It's not that new, about 10 years ago, but still relevant and new than others. They called party-state model. By the way, I also use party-state model, but I use it in different ways. That is why I make some differences in Chinese title. I don't translate it as 党国, but rather 党领导下. But in this party-state model, usually supported by Stanford scholar Teresa Tsai, also argues that CCP, the Communist Party, try to control economy by control SOE more formally. actually it's quite similar to the national championship model, but they make the party in front rather than as a backdrop. And the fourth is usually ignored one, but if you ask a Chinese scholar what is state capitalism, they will not say it's a new thing. They will say it's a traditional thing, quite similar like Soviet Union's new economic policy and Lenin, and quite similar to the economic situation in China after 49, before socialist reform. So the argument is the very strong role of state in regulate this capitalism is not very unique in China. Actually, you can observe the similar thing in Russia, Brazil, India, and a lot of countries. Okay, so apparently the people are talking different things, but all these things maintain the one thing, that if you want to understand state capitalism in China, SOEs, state-owned enterprises, should be at the heart of a Chinese economic model. In other words, the ownership is the feature of Chinese state capitalism. And when you want to advocate state capitalism, you will say the public ownership, state ownership will be very effective for gathering resources and curb the bureaucratic cost. If you want to criticize that, you would say it's a predatory of grabbing hand in terms of Huang Yasheng grabbing hand to the private sectors. So state ownership or public ownership is the most fundamental concept at the center. But there are apparently some problems here. There are some, if we admit that, if China developed its economy by insisting the state ownership, it against to our observations. The first thing is China's private sector has been very, very big. And it started a Peterson Institute for International Economics found that the private sector account over half of China's largest company by revenue and market value in 2020. And that percent is only 8% in 2010. So it means under current leadership, China's private sector has been much bigger than last leadership. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about economic regulations. And usually we think in state capitalism, the SOEs will be treated more favorably, that you tend to impose a more lenient regulation on them. But from legislative document, at least we can observe that all the documents are not based on ownership. Right now, all enterprises are regulated by a whole set of law. And in the enforcement, we can observe that at least on the local level, there are two things happen. One is the central government become much tougher than before, in particular in regulating local government controlled SOEs. And the local government become more proactive in curbing central government controlled SOEs. So in that case, it is very hard to say economic regulation is one side of preference to the state-owned enterprises. And the third thing is, this theory also overlooks conflict between SOEs and regulators. Of course, you can generally say SOEs will never rebel the party leadership, but they indeed have quarrel and conflict with China's government regulators and ministries and agencies. For example, in 2019, China's environmental punishment mostly comes to the SOEs. And only in this year, Chinese state-owned enterprises on the energy sector had to be fined $1 billion in this year. So we can say the conflict and struggle between SOEs and the regulators become much more fiercer than before. So given all these facts, it starts to ask a question. If your state capitalism is the key of China's growth, or is at the center of China's economic political economy, what is it? Does it means favorable treatment, or does it mean others? So here, okay, I developed my own model and argues that actually China have experienced two shift of reformative axis. That axis means when you conduct reform, you want your reform to focus on a pair of relations. That means you can adjust the boundary of this relation to advance your policy. So before 1978, I argue that China is full of state-industry axis. What means that state-industry axis? It means the state directly control industry sector rather than enterprises. So at that time, the CPC and industrial sector will directly drive the economy, and the state and the party will plan the production. The whole purpose of them is to generate more production and have more output capacities. And also, the state used the industrial sector to realize the aim of controlling and governance. And also, they solve the problem of workforce and output. But we can say in that case, in the state industrial axis, the SOE is not important at all. The industrial sectors matters. So in that case, we will observe that actually the SOE and state capitalism is not a very new thing. Actually, it's a product of Chinese opening up. But before that, this concept is an ownership is not important at all because everything just could be effectively implemented without considering the ownership. So you just need to consider who controls whom and who have a final decision. And in Deng Xiaoping's administration, we see the first shift after 1949. That's a shift from the state industrial assets to the private public assets. So in that time, the government tried to sell considerable state asset. In particular, at the time, they don't see this state asset as something valuable. They saw this kind of asset as a burden. So they just try to get rid of them. So in that case, they try to create a market to enable this state asset could be transacted and could be traded. So in that case, the primary way for the government to regulate the economy is not from ordering from government to the industrial sector, but to carefully adjust the line between the public and private. It means if the government wants to have more market in this sector, they will give more ownership to the private. But if they feel unsafe, they will take back some private to the public ownership. So that actually created two sectors, the public sector and under different levels government control and a market of private sectors. And the government is just a watchdog between the line of private and public. And after 2012, we encounter a new leadership. And I argue that enter a new axis we call state market access. It means the government re-enter the intervention of the economy, and they don't think the public and private line would be enough, but rather they're trying to, on the one hand, expand the influence of state-owned sectors, but also they want to ensure the political influence on all sectors and more importantly, on the market. So in that case, the line become shift again, that the access of China reform is not from ownership, but right now it's from to what extent the government, the state would intervene or even replace the market. So in that case, I call it state market access and shows that and the instrument to implement such access is a regulation, whereas party lead or state lead, very intrusive, very fruitful, very powerful regulators, super regulators here. Okay, so here I gave a very brief summary of this two transformation and three axes. We can see the different key players, matters, evaluation, incentives, and vehicles, but it's a form. You can take a picture if you want, because I cannot give more details, but you can see they have different goals and they have different vehicles, and it means the focus of government have been shifted significantly. And then I will give you some examples. I will give you two-side examples. Some examples about the second calibration. It shows what happens under the new leadership. And I will give two longer cases on energy sector to show the whole process, whole trajectory of two calibrations, to show the current calibration, recalibration is not a new one. So let's say the housing. So in 2013, the leader, Xi, emphasized houses are for living, not for speculation. 房子是用来住的，不是用来炒的。Okay, it caused a lot of panic on the government because they set three red lines, 三条红线 to set limits on the amount of money that developers that could borrow from the bank. But we need to mention that that goal is not to speed up state-owned land price. We have known that in Guangzhou, the land price have been half than before. Neither it used to uphold the state-owned real estate companies. It imposed regulation on whole sectors. Actually, it punished everyone. And because government is the biggest landowner in China, actually it punished local government the most. That is why we right now have a very high local debt. So that policy is very different than before because apparently you punish everyone with the blood of ownership. Of course, we say there are less cases of state-owned developers in bankruptcy or be fiscal punished. But it is because in SOEs, usually they have a stronger tendency for compliance and easier for them to get money, get remedy from the bank, and they have more savings. It is not because this policy has been used differently. And actually some state-owned enterprises like 绿地, Greenland also encounter some problems. And the second thing is the private tutoring sector crackdown. We know it's crackdown that you cannot give private tutoring, but it's also not for the private. In Guangzhou, a lot of so-called private school, not only in Guangzhou, actually in Shanghai and Beijing, actually public school hold private school. For example, the best middle school in Guangzhou is the Huanan Shifan Daxue Fuzhong, the affiliate middle school of South China Normal University. And this school is a public school, but they have a lot of affiliate schools. So affiliate school of Huanan Normal University. And all this are private school because Huanan affiliate middle school will earn money by holding these private schools. But in crackdown, there's also ownership right. They really don't care what would be impact of the school. Actually, a lot of such private school has been ordered to transform to a real public school. All have to be closed. The third is information and Silicon Valley and the Silicon chips. We have because of time, we will put it very short. And they punish and advocate private and public company in a similar way. And then we go to a longer two pieces. I choose oil and electricity. The reason is usually we think oil and electricity must be state-owned, the natural money supply. And they have a very strong spirit and tradition of state, not only in China, to control oil and power. But in China, we have also observed, even if the two sectors right now still under a majority of them still under public ownership or state ownership, we can still clearly observe the two shift. So let's go back to oil sector. And the oil sector before the 1948 is quite like in state industry sector, that you have oil sector there and you demand this oil sector to produce oil as much as possible. So after 1949, the Chinese Civil War ended, and China needed oil because at the time, China's Air Force even don't have enough fuel to fly up, to take off. But so back in the 1949, China produced around 900,000 barrels of oil per day. It is much lower, far from enough. So Daqing become very important for China to develop its oil production. So there is a model that's called oil battle model. That means you use a military form developing strategy that you gather people there and you have such an institution as you 指挥部 command post, 突击队 assault force that's used to develop oil field. It was necessary at the time. It is because the government actually did not invest on this project. They provide some equipment, they gather people together, and these people need to feed themselves. So you can think in these cities, you must have a military post to organize the people and make sure everyone will devote the most. So in that case, the government really don't care the ownership. You can have different levels of ownership. The Dacheng actually have its ownership because it's much richer, and the worker in Dacheng is much richer than other local residents. And Dacheng earn money and redistribute within Dacheng. They never pay to the local government. So it looks like it's not that public, right? It's quite like a private company, but the government actually don't care about this. So it's kind of state industrial relation that government only care about how much the oil industry would provide. So after reform, they start a new first move to the public-private access. The reason is, at the time, you cannot imagine, at the time, China found oil is very valuable. So China decided to sell oil to other countries to earn US dollar. So in that case, Dacheng's oil is not only for industrial use, domestic industrial use. It's crucial for Dacheng to use money to earn extra money for the state. Of course, Dacheng has similar incentives. So at that time, the central government was facing a dilemma. That is whether you encourage Dacheng to produce more by reward Dacheng with the money that Dacheng earned by itself, or you insist to earn by your own. So Dacheng will be reluctant to produce more. So the compromise is they have a revenue retention system. That means they divide the oil into in-plan and out-plan. If you have produced something, if you have already produced all in-plan oil, you can earn extra money by selling the oil to the market. And also they allow you to set price to the out-produced oil. So that caused another shift, the first shift, a public-private shift. So it also encourage the oil production. You can see they're rocketing 2.8 million barrels per day in 1989. The almost, well, thousands of times than 30 years ago. And also in that time, because when Dacheng get a lot of money, you want to have them to be under prices. That is because first you want to either management, secondly, you want some mild competition between enterprises to redistribute the money between different oil sectors. Okay, so there are different ways of collaboration, and in general, okay, they're all based on the how to make this company as a modern company, how to list this company in the stock market, and how to raise money. So in that case, what government control of care is whether this company still a public ownership and whether allow private ownership to enter this field. But in terms of management and the way of using resource or earning money, there are no big differences between the public and the private sectors. So they're quite similar in their behavior and strategy. So under Xi Jinping administration, we see another shift that is from recalibration to the state market access. So in that case, we observe something that is quite different from Deng Xiaoping's time. The first is they equalize the treatment to different kind of ownership, that they also open the market that allow the private capital to invest on the oil sectors. But secondly, they also make oil as a strategic sector. In other words, that they really don't care who produces oil. You can be the private company, could be the public company. And more importantly, in China, most of China's oil is not produced by China. It's from importation. So they really don't care who can buy the oil, but I want to make sure the oil would serve the strategic interest of state. So we can say during that time, on the one hand, they try to liberalize the oil sector, but secondly, they also want to secure the energy security. The first is, you can see in the oil state-owned enterprises, they demand these companies to focus on oil production. Before that, as long as you're a public company, if you can earn money, you can by providing service or developing real estate, it's okay. But right now, the central government definitely want China Oil, CNPC, Sinopec, Snook to focus on produce oil and to reserve oil, and also to relate it, the oil production with military use. So why there are secondary calibrations? So we can say, in general, I will repeat that, but the similar reason is the government seems to say the market incentives is not enough to keep the SOEs to be loyal to the central government. Actually, the ownership is not that relevant to the political loyalty, so they demand direct control, even if you are a private company, can also, from the similar logic, have a loyalty from regulation. Okay, so we can see another sector, that is electricity. The electricity sector is very interesting because a lot of people think we are in a national oligopoly of the power market. But actually, when China starts to have its power sector, it allows profit-seeking activities. So if we go back to before the reform, before the reform, China experienced a lot of power shortages. And the method of central government is to encourage the sectors to produce their electricity by themselves. For example, at the time in Beijing, in 1960s, the government allowed Beijing government to produce, allow Beijing government to build a company to sell Beijing produced electricity. And this situation comes to the opening of reform, and everybody are encouraged to produce electricity. That's called 全民办电. That every sectors probably will have a small plant generators to produce some power, at least to your sector. But if you can produce more, you can sell them privately. There's no uniform electricity market, but you can sell your self-produced electricity to other factories. So that's a legacy you can still observe in late 2010. There is a industrial company called Weiqiao 集团 in Shandong, Weiqiao Group. It's a mineral company, but it has very powerful power generating capacity. So the most revenue of the company comes from selling the power it privately produced. So that's a legacy of the 1980s. So at that time, everyone is encouraged to encourage the growth of the electricity. So it's quite different with the oil sector because from its starting point, China's electricity industry is fragmented. But in the reform, the state tried to centralize all these sectors into big power groups. So we can say several rounds of corporations reform to build like big companies like Huaneng, like State Grid, like state power and the national grid and North Grid and the South Grid. And all these companies actually was built in a process of the vast corporatization from 1985 until 22. So in that case, all of the companies are based on very small and fragmented facilities, and they are purchased by the state-owned enterprises, sometimes forced by the government in order to make this economic power at the hand of the state-owned sectors. What's the reason? Okay, we tell it later. Okay, the second calibration, but also under the current leadership, is they try to, again, encourage private sectors. Okay, right now China has opened up private sectors in generation, in dispatch, and they were even talking about they want to make the grid, 电网, to be a utility. It means it's stop to profit seeking, but rather to encourage every generator of the plant to produce energy. But also, on the other hand, it encourages some other policies, like, the, right? Oh, I want to go earlier. Yeah. They just want to go, while they want to ensure the eco treatment and the market expansion, but they also want to focus on efficiency and reliability, and in particular, they focus on green energy. So you can see the current policy of China electricity car, it's kind of China's policy, because you have more electricity car, it causes more demand of green energy. So that is also a new transformation that they become ownership blind, but focus on what these companies, what would be sectors to comply with the state policy orientation. So what's the reason? Well, I have to talk about some cases. So what's the reason for China's great shift in China's regulatory state? So I would say there first I want to say there are some very easily observed reasons, but there's some deep reasons. Of course, the easier observed reason is because they think the freer model based on the ownership is not effective to guarantee the state to deliver its policy orientation. We always say Chinese SOEs right now must pass a lot of loyalty tests. You must by voluntarily complying with the top regulation in order to show your respect to central leadership. But how it happened, it's because the central government started to lose the confidence to controlling these vast state-owned capitals. So when you talk about the capitals are controlling the economy, they don't say that they are private capitals. They say capitals. So it means public capital could be also political, either a risk to the political stability and policy making. And another problem is the loss of legitimacy of common prosperity. That is a fundamental dilemma. That why a question is why Chinese Communist Party want to use a method of capitalism, state capitalism, to advance its economy. Okay, of course, the legitimacy could be argued that because we are based on performance legitimacy and growth is quite important. But then the question is, while it's enhanced the legitimacy of the party leadership, whether it still upholds the legitimacy of a mission of the party as a socialist party rather than the capitalist party. So in that case, apparently Xi Jinping's leadership is facing that time that it must consider that's a big problem, how to solve this problem of legitimacy. And as I have said, actually that problem is quite new to Xi. In the last Hu Jintao administration, such a gap between rich and poor, and also we call it ideological control that who really benefit from Chinese economic reform has been severe. So that's a determination to realize common prosperity that you must to say we must have some redistribution system beyond the capital rules, but based on the political logic. There are some easier ones, but I would say there are some institutional ones behind the regulatory shift. Okay, the first thing is, okay, the China also have a central leadership that the information all gathered to the central leadership, but the responsibility or accountability leadership is not at the center. In that means we know the local government or enterprise that are doing something bad, make me unhappy. I rarely can punish these individuals. That is why anti-corruption campaign is very important in China, because it allows the central government or high above government to pick the individual out to give punishment. But just think about a lot of cases, not only in energy sector, but particularly in the oil and electric sector. We know the case called Wuhan. That's a lot of people, all key persons in the sector, they have their interest group. That in that case, you cannot rely on individualized punishment accountability system to punish them. So the task for the central government in that way, if you want to make some distribution, you must develop some more direct controlling method beyond the ownership and beyond the conventional bureaucratic structure supervising this ownership, but rather you want some more direct way. That we call the 监察 monitoring. We call it anti-corruption, and more importantly, I would say they call RPIs, responsibility power sharing. That is 责任终身责任制. That means if you have done something that makes the leadership feel problematic, that you'll get potential risk long after probably that thing happened. So in that case, but this methodology must be reinforced not through the conventional SOE or bureaucratic way, but it could be only used in an external way. Okay. So right now we are facing a time that China and US are struggling on that thing. And we know TikTok right now, even it's an American company, but it handed Singapore people, but it criticized the right gene, but how to deal with the right genetic issues. Okay, so my response is, first, I don't know how to deal with this. Okay, it's from political decision making. But for me, I would say, as if we assume to part of parties, the China and the US still want to not decoupling. They still want to do some business. Probably they should abandon the insistence on the ownership as a figure of life of the enterprises. Because we have observed that some state-owned enterprises is not that state-owned. Yes, the state-owned as a shareholder, but they're comparatively far from policy making. They perform and more like an ordinary private company. But rather, some companies probably have more concerns. But the concern is not from ownership. It's not from laboring, but you need to talk about what they are doing and whether this relation have indeed will jeopardize the trade and the investment. So I would say EU-China investment agreement, I know it is not effective now, probably is going to be died, but I think it's still worthwhile trying because they abide ownership, but they try to evaluate the real relation between China and foreign countries based on activities, that whether the state would perform and behave on more concrete settings. Okay, so in sum, it is my research, and this paper is forthcoming on American Law Journal. It's a torture, I know, too many footnotes. But in general, I want to make a contribution on three things. First, I want to say state capitalism probably is not a good model now. And secondly, I want to say we probably need to say regulation at the center as a vehicle for the party to control the economy and to think about this regulatory approach as a center, to set a center of defining Chinese political economy of reform. And thirdly, I think the further task should think about how to bridge the liberal capitalism. Of course, in the United States, they're still arguing about this, whether American whether United States of America or Europe are still could be called liberal capitalism, or they should be called another kind of state capitalism or public capitalism. But how to bridge two systems, that China's regulatory per state and American type regulatory state, and how to push out that coordination and harmonization forward. Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking for a comment.
Okay, thank you, Professor Huang, for this very insightful and thought-provoking talk. While I have a ton of questions, I open the floor first to the audience to see if you have any questions. And before you ask questions, please briefly introduce yourself, your name and affiliation. Thanks.
Hi, Professor Huang. I'm Joanne, and I'm the Assistant Research Officer for the Philip K. Chuang Center for Chinese Law. So I'm just curious about, I once heard a debate on Chinese studies that, so a lot of studies on Chinese law and regulations are kind of trapped by a teleological approach that everything an authoritarian region do is to stay in power, is to, to be safe. But, especially bureaucratic states in China, they are making a lot of decisions every day. And like sometimes it's not the first thing out of their mind is to stay in power. They are kind of balancing a lot of things at the same time. So I wonder how you like kind of, respond to this debate on how, Chinese studies are kind of all about, how an authoritarian region do is to secure power. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's very great question. So I make direct response. Okay, so I think it's a very, very interesting, super important question. I would say it's my personal experience during the pandemics. Don't move is the most dangerous thing. Okay, if you don't move, you're locked into the small community and you have a lot of problems. So I think also that's panic to Chinese leadership that they think reform is always necessary because you need always find I call fuel of the legitimacy. We say the food transformation, why it happens because the traditional state industrial access cannot provide further legitimacy because at the time you cannot demand, even if you can demand the company to sell, to produce more, you cannot find a market. You must have them to find the market by themselves or you cannot feed the workers. So in that case, they indeed know the panic and they know it's a time to make a shift. Of course, the shift got two meaning. The first is you find some way to develop the economy. Secondly, you rebuild your accountability system. You say, okay, I'm not accountable now. I'm not responsible for you to help you to sell our things. You sell for yourself. I have new commissions to do. So that is something I think I totally agree that the whole purpose of the power, not necessarily authoritarian power, stay in power. Just think about Biden and Trump. I don't think the very aged president is still try to stay in power. That is, I think, the logic of every kind of political practice. But for authoritarian state, I think the problem is if they want to stay in power, probably they will try to use strategy to make it very safe by cracking down different voices. I think, yes, it still happens, but it's still based on the assessment, self-assessment, what is the best strategy for the authority. And also on the local level, just think about Guangzhou government. Why Guangzhou? A lot of city town in Guangzhou, but in Beijing, you even cannot have some, 低端人口, the low-end people must be evacuated. So both of them is for the social stability, but they use very different strategy. So I don't think the logic of Chinese study have denied the diversity of the colorful practice of China government, and neither it also refuse the possibility to make a shift or change.
Or maybe I can ask my questions when other people are still thinking. So the first question is, I think you've hinted that and between the shift from the Hu administration to the current administration, we've seen a change of the say incentive structure, right? That is and implemented by the party state. So we used to see more positive incentive provided under the public-private distinction. So we're giving more economic incentive to the SOE managers to incentivize them to increase efficiency and marketization, et cetera. And now we're seeing sort of introduction of more negative incentives in the sense that we're using more punishment to deter them for non-violent, non-compliance, including, say, the anti-corruption campaign and also the pay cut across the management in SOEs. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on what are the implications for the shift from a more positive incentive to a negative incentive scheme.
I think it's quite important question too. I think it's quite important question too, because a lot of common saying, because apparently right now the negative measures are more used to deter the behavior of the SOE leaders, and it means the entrepreneurship is not rewarded that much as before, even though probably there's still some reward there, but cannot compare with before. Assumption is it make Chinese SOE become more risk averse, that they try to avoid political risks and try to take a more safe strategy. In particular, they want to just strictly follow the line of the party. But the party line is the opposite. They not only punish excessive behavior, they also punish 不作为 non-behavior. So in that case, it is very difficult for the SOE to determine the safe zone, but they still demanded to do something. I think that if we pay attention to the recent corruption cases, I think the zone is they should try to avoid the direct trade or interaction with the private sector on some, in particular, in the deal relating to state assets. So if you take example, still in Guangzhou right now, the taking things goes to exclusively to the state-owned enterprises, and state-owned enterprises work with the village, work with the government, but not private developers. So I think the purpose is they try to, it is not from the government order, but it is self-regulation approach that they want to try to control the transaction between the private sector really clean, because they know the audit people will go back, they will read the flu and they read the charter and they got into problems. So I would say, I know there should be a lot of impact, but to me, I think it will cause less transaction between the private and the public sector. Think about during the Hu Wen time, even though private and public line is important, that is why I graduated from Peking University, so I know Gong Xiantian's argument that whether Chinese property law should protect the public ownership and the private ownership. But the important thing, as I still argue, that even if for the person claim the public ownership, it still means ownership important. Ownership matters, but right now ownership is not that matters. Ownership is less matter than behavior. And whether even if you are dealing with the private thing, they still look at whether your behavior have touched the right lines. So in that case, of course, I would say the gap between public and private transaction would be discouraged, because the public-owned SOE have less control on the private side. And even if, when they have to do so, there's some new practice like 企业合规 and also supervision, the enterprise compliance that allow SOEs and along with government to supervise private companies to make sure they comply with the line of the SOEs, and SOEs line usually in line with the parties and government. So, but in general, there would be less transaction, in some the less transaction and more strict public control to the private sector.
Thank you. So, I have another question. So I agree with you that the regulatory objectives that the Chinese state is pursuing seems to be broader than the term state capitalism entails, right? It goes beyond the pursuit of economic efficiency and the liberalization of the choices, etc. And it also includes the broad strategic goals such as the protection of public interest and national security. But then my question is, in the economic sector and also the energy sector that you study, how do we define terms or goals such as public interest and national security?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's another perfect question. I think, I think the definition, it's very important for scholar and for international community. But our observation is it could be really broad and really bigger. It basically claims that what area the government would take directly at the hand. So also my theory of great shift is not saying they are reinforcing something. I'm saying they are shifting to some area that they can exert more intrusive control. So in that case, national security, for example, the energy security is not traditional national security because we are in the peacetime. It's not in a wartime. So I'm not an expert of international law at all. So you're an expert. So correct me if I'm wrong. I don't. It's not conventional international national security, but right now they are over guidance of national security and 总体国家安全观 general will of national security definitely include a lot of things like this. So personally, I don't think the central government will impose regulation on every corner of that thing. It's more like a backdrop and more like a reserve, the regulatory power, intrusive power, saying if I want, for example, if I think Sinopec is going to make a deal with Myanmar, that and probably in this deal, the SOE only have 1% interest there, but 99% it goes to the foreign company or private company that still leave an important course of action. So in that case, I would say probably no definition or very broad definition is a part of strategy. It's right now the definition that you'll have a party, regulatory part state relies on the bigger needs to realize the regulation, because the purpose of the regulation is different, as I said, with conventional thinking of American type of regulation that basically they enforce the will either from president or legislation. But here, regulation, it goes to the party. It's like the party use the regulation and to serve the strategic way. So in that case, I would say the regulation is primarily gave a non-professional, non-expertise agency a leeway to intervene the deal that troubles it. So that's my observation.
Okay, thank you. So we're right on time. Please join me in thanking Professor Huang for this wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much.